Thank you for having me today. When Rich asked me to speak, it was a great honor. Berkeley is a big part of my family's history. My father is a professor here. I went to Cal as an undergrad. My wife went to Cal as an undergrad. My uncle went to Cal. My sister went to Cal. My brother-in-law went to Cal. My father-in-law, my mother-in-law both went to Cal. It goes on. When I asked to speak here, it was a big deal for me. And then the panic set in of what the hell am I actually going to talk about? So Tenny calls me up and says, well, just talk about what you're interested in and help me think that through. And I gave her probably the most boring title of a speech, which was, what is it, Make Your Business Your Data or something like that. But in thinking about it, I thought about all the things that I wanted to really share. And I am going to talk about data and the opportunity that it presents from a business opportunity. But I also want to share a little bit about my own life journey to Facebook, what I've learned at Facebook, what I learned in business school, and then I'll try to wrap that up in terms of how this relates to business opportunities. I'm not a huge fan of presentation style speaking, so I'm going to try to walk through these slides in about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A, which is really my favorite way to present. A little bit about who am I. As Rich said, I was an undergrad at Berkeley. I've been in technology my entire life. As a kid, my dad would always bring technology from his labs home so that he could do work at home. And my favorite thing to do was to take stuff apart. And this really pissed my dad off. After a while, it became clear that I needed to start figuring out how to put the stuff back together, not just take it apart. Especially when it got to things like the personal computers and stuff like that. And that really began the beginning of my interest in technology, and that has lasted all through high school and then college. I began my career at a company that was in Emeryville called Sybase. I don't know how many people have heard of them. They were acquired by SAP a few years ago. Sybase is a data company. And my first job at Sybase, I worked on a product called Sybase MPP. Which stands for Massively Parallel Processing. This was a very early on technology. Keep in mind, this is roughly 1993, 1994 that we were working on this. We had systems that we were building that were 500, 1,000 nodes in scale to process all this data. And it was a really exciting internship opportunity. I remember coming home one day to my girlfriend, who was Shannon at the time, I really was proud of something that I had accomplished. I was working on performance optimization of this system. And I came to Shannon and I showed her, I was like, oh, you got to see what I did today. And she's like, okay, whatever. So she stands behind me and I bring up the computer and I start running the TPCD benchmark, and I press enter, and 6 seconds later, the cursor moves, and I'm like, did you see that? That's amazing! Shannon's like, what? Fortunately, this is not why she married me. So, what was exciting for me, I was like, Shannon, we just processed 4 terabytes of data in 6 seconds. This is amazing. And really, a couple things that I want to get taken away from this story. One is data has been a part of my professional life really from the beginning. And the second is that it's something that has really now come of age. That back then, yes, 500 nodes was pretty amazing, and 4 terabytes actually was pretty amazing. It's really the opportunities that exist today are a result of a confluence of technical trends that have really been going on for a while. And this creates some significant business opportunities for companies. A little bit more about my background. So I stayed in technology, in technology development roles for pretty much my entire career. And in 2005, I was promoted to CIO of KLA-Tencor. And this was a really big opportunity for me and something I was quite proud of. It was also a little bit of the beginning of sort of the end of this phase of my career. For those of you who don't know KLA-Tencor, I don't blame you. Most people don't. It's the biggest company in the Silicon Valley that nobody's ever heard of. The purpose of the business is really to make technology cheaper, particularly semiconductor chips. KLA-Tencor does inspection of the chips during the manufacturing process and helps to find defects and improve yield and such. And if that sounds really boring, it is. Now, my job is even worse than this. My job is to help KLA-Tencor do this cheaper. So I spent a huge amount of time outsourcing, offshoring, automating jobs. And I was actually really good at this, and I got very well rewarded for it, which only made it worse because it felt like this was all I could do. I was stuck. This was when I started to really think about, I need to do something different. I need to invest in myself, and decided to join the Berkeley Columbia program in 2009. I also decided after a while, I cannot keep on the same line. I need to stop. And so I engaged in what I like to call career skydiving. I quit a perfectly good job in the summer of 2009. And if that sounds stupid, it was. For anybody who remembers, this was the recession was just beginning, and things were just getting worse and worse and worse. And that idea felt really good in the moment, and then about 3 days later, it was a little questionable. But fortunately, I was in school, and there were a ton of things that I got from the Berkeley Columbia program. I could talk a whole day over this, but I just want to highlight three points for you. The first is that relationships really matter. This was one of the reasons that I went to school. I knew that I would build up new relationships with people. I had no idea how it was going to affect my life. There's a couple of people in the audience today who are really good friends of mine that I have been very close with since the program. And our families spend a huge amount of time together. We invest together. And even really beyond that, my entire class, the entire experience that I got out of the program was just accentuated by everybody that I cohorted with. And so this was a huge takeaway for me. The second thing is that there's always something new to learn. Just one example, statistics. I was very good at math and science. It's why I became an engineer. I sucked at statistics. I think I flunked Math 55 at Cal twice before I finally passed it. I really struggled with Stats 25 as an undergrad. I didn't finally get it until I was in business school, and my stats professor just helped me completely see the world in a different way, and that was just one of many takeaways. And the third thing that I got out of business school is that you really always have to be investing in yourself. It is the best investment that you can make. I think this is why the cultural attribute of student always resonates with me so much, is that so much of my life has improved when I made the decision to prioritize investments in myself over investments in something else, remodeling the house, or worse, focusing on that next project at work that's going to help benefit perhaps my career. Those investments that you make in yourself pay off in spades. So as Dean Lyons mentioned, at the end of my tenure at Cal, I became CIO of Facebook. And this was a tremendous opportunity for me. Again, my classmates were a big part of what made that possible. When I joined when I joined Facebook, it was a much smaller company than it is today. It was about 1,400 people. We've now crossed 10,000. It was about $1 billion in revenue. We're on a $14 billion run rate. Everything on the company was much smaller, much more uncertain than it is today. And it's been a pretty amazing journey. But I want to share a couple things about Facebook that have been huge learning experiences for me. The first is the power of culture. Facebook is an absolutely culturally driven company. It is all about the mission. It is all about the culture. Everything else is subordinate to that. All the processes, there is very little bureaucracy in the company. Even the technology, it's all subordinate to culture. Culture is what matters at this company. Just a quick story on this. Within the first couple months of coming to Facebook, I had a really crappy thing I had to do. We were using Google Docs at the time, and Facebook made the strategic decision that we didn't want to use Google Docs anymore for probably some reasons you can guess. And unfortunately, if anybody's used Google Docs, it's a really, really cool technology. And keep in mind, this is 2010, and there weren't a lot of options. And so my job was to help lead the company through a decision process to figure out what we were going to do. And we had a big meeting with Zuck and the head of engineering and the core technical staff of the company. This is who this decision was going to affect the most. And we basically had a decision to make. We could go forward with Microsoft technology or an alternative. And the groupthink in the room is all about Microsoft. And I was the one dissenting voice. I had a pretty strong opinion that we should consider the alternative. I was questioning the status quo. I was actually quite grateful for the fact, this was one of the first learning experiences for me with Zuck, because I got to work directly with him, that he sought out and made sure that my voice was heard. And we didn't make a decision in that meeting. We had to get some additional information before we could make that decision. But I felt pretty good about it. 2 days later, I got an email from Zuck, and it said, "Please resign." And I said, "Oh." And I was about to tell Rich that this question of status quo thing doesn't work too well. So it actually took me about an hour to open up the email, because I was really freaked out about this. And I figured I just came on too strong. And I just psychoanalyzed it. My parents are psychologists, so this is something I do. And finally, I've got the courage to open up the email, and I realized what had happened. And so there was a big leak that occurred the day before about a product that Facebook was working on. It was very damaging to the company. And Zuck sent out this email to the entire company addressed as "Please resign." And in it, he said, "Look, we don't know who you are, the person who's responsible for this leak yet, but we'll find you and we'll fire you. But I want you to know, you'll save us a whole bunch of time by just resigning, because clearly you do not want the culture that I want. Clearly you do not want people to be entrusted with information, and I want that. Clearly you do not want to have an open dialogue within the company where confidential information can be shared broadly. And this is exactly what I want and I expect from this company." And every single person in the company had the exact same reaction that I did when they opened it. They're like, "Oh my God, what did I do?" Which was really the brilliance of the email, because it really grasped your attention and it got you to really think about this. And it's become lore within the company. So, we'll talk about the "Please resign" email as just one example of why, how to handle confidential information, why we don't leak information very often, and why it's absolutely expected that you don't. So the culture is really everything at Facebook, and we solve our problems through culture much more than we try to solve our problems through bureaucracy or even technology. The second thing I learned at Facebook was the notion of innovation. Actually, I'm going to stay on this slide for a second. There's a lot of ingredients to an innovative culture, but there's two that I want to highlight that are really obvious benefits to innovation. The first is the notion that failure is okay. Failure in our world is synonymous with learning, and in fact, we celebrate failure. We have these signs all over the campus that say, "Fail harder, think wrong, what would you do if you're not afraid, move fast and break things." And the key point here is that if you are doing stuff like everybody else, you are not innovating, you are not challenging the status quo, you are not trying something new. If you're failing, you're experimenting. Now, this doesn't mean that we want to fail stupidly. We don't want to make the same failure over and over and over again. You're not learning in that case. We don't want to experiment and fail with things that are really important to get right, so we don't experiment with our financial statements, for example. In all other contexts, or in most other contexts, failure is actually something to embrace. And so we don't have a culture of fear that if you take on a new product offering and it flops, like the Facebook phone did, or like many other products that we have did, it really doesn't matter. It's what you learn from it that matters. And in fact, most of our products flopped from the beginning. Newsfeed, which is the most popular aspect of Facebook, was a giant disaster when it was originally rolled out. It freaked everybody out. We didn't have a number of things that make Newsfeed more popular today in terms of the intelligence that's in it. So failure is okay, and we embrace failure. And this is, I think, the first core ingredient to innovation. The second is white space. If you don't have time to experiment, you won't. If you got to get a job done, you will follow the tried and true route because you know that you can get it done within some period of time. We create white space in many ways. The most famous way is the hackathon. The hackathon is like, okay, we're going to basically shut down the company for 3 days and people can work on whatever the hell they want. And it doesn't have to have a business outcome. There's no committee that decides what things you're going to hack on. You just do it. But there's other ways that we enable white space. We have hack-a-months. In my organization, we have this notion of wild-ass bets. I can talk about these in more detail in Q&A if anybody wants to go deeper on this stuff. But the key point is white space creates an opportunity for experimentation and learning. The last thing that I want to share with you about Facebook is how important data is to us. And there's a lot of different elements of this. Facebook is a data company. This is a picture of the Facebook database. It's a little bit dated. I think this one is from 2010. And so at the time, we had roughly 600 million people using the product. What you see on this picture, every dot of light is a person and their location. And the lines are the connections between them, the relationships that they have. There is no geography on this map. What the geography that you see is where people are. And you'll notice the dark spots are some of the places that maybe have geography, but we're not allowed to ship our product, at least not yet. But everything that Facebook does is really about data. Now, we're a little unique in what we do. The data that we focus on is data for people. What the product is a digital representation of what human society does. Friendship is not something that we invented. Liking is not something that we invented. We just put it into a button. But it all gets captured in data, and the way that it works is through data. And we use data to make decisions on everything. It could be whether the button for more features on the mobile phone is on the upper left or the lower right of your screen. The decision to move that button will be a data-based decision. We'll put a pilot in place. We'll have some percentage of the population see it one way, another percentage of the population see it another way, and we'll see what works. When we made the decision to take our Messenger product out of Facebook, that wasn't a gut decision. That wasn't something that we just decided on a whim. There was a very detailed analysis that demonstrated what this would do for Facebook Messenger if we pulled it out of the core application. And we took an application that had 50 million users and brought it up above 600 million users. So data is everything, and data within the company is a core part of how we make decisions, how we do things, and it is really the product. Which kind of gets into the next part of my talk. Now, before I get into data and business, I want to talk a little bit about a few trends. The first is mobile. It is hard to fully appreciate in this country the impact that mobile is having on the world. We all know this. I mean, if you go back to 2007, 2006, and what it was like to walk around with those Nokia phones or the Motorola flip phones, the Razors, and the world that we have today now with Android devices and iPhones, it's just very, very different. And that's transformative for us. And mobile has penetrated everything in the developed world. We have a very high smartphone penetration rate. This is the Facebook mobile users trend over time from 2011 to 2015. We are, and you can just see the dramatic growth rate. But where this is even more interesting is in the developing world. So in this world, we've all gone from PCs to laptops to phones and tablets. And in many respects, these migrations have been additive. We just add more technology to our homes. But in places like Indonesia or India or Africa, they're just skipping the PC altogether and just going straight to mobile devices. And their experience of the digital world is through these tiny little 3.5-inch screens. And this affects things in tremendous ways. First, there's new applications that are coming about. Now, this is the numbers here are almost laughable because they're 9 months old, which is crazy. It gets to the expansion of what's going on with mobile. But messaging as a platform has become one of the killer apps of the mobile device. And you have things like WhatsApp and Line and KakaoTalk and others that have become platforms in and of themselves. Now, we don't experience that here in this country because of how we consume technology, but if you go to Asia, you will see this, that these platforms are, in some respects, even more powerful than what we see as the traditional social network and the traditional digital networks. Just another example of how this is affecting things, for us, in Indonesia, the #1 digital commerce platform is Facebook messaging. And it's not because we have a product for this, it's just because that's how they communicate with each other and that's how they transact. And so they've come up with ways to innovate around the capabilities of the product in that country. So mobile is having a huge impact both in the developed world and in the developing world. The second thing that's been going on forever is the cost of compute continues to fall. This is Moore's Law, this is technical innovation. This has been going on for decades. But the part of why the story that I said about Sybase and processing 6 terabytes of data in 6 seconds or whatever it was is laughable in today's age is because how things have expanded. And with the rapidly falling cost of technology, the interconnection that mobile enables, the ability to store information, the world is exploding. IBM believes that 2.5 exabytes a day is captured in today's world. That 90% of the world's data is less than 2 years old. And that the volume of business data is expected to double every year. Put in more real terms, Walmart is processing 1 million transactions a day. For Facebook, in 2007, our analytics environment was tens of terabytes in size to support tens of millions of users. In 2015, it's hundreds of petabytes in size to support 1.4 billion users. The scale on data is just unimaginable. If you can't see it, you can't fully appreciate it. And what this is doing is it's creating a new asset that creates big business opportunities for companies. And this is what I want to talk about next. And so it's obvious that this is an asset for companies like Google and Facebook. Great, yes. But this is not just about the technology industry. This is also about traditional industries. So, to pull from the old business school slide, if you just start with thinking about sources of differentiation for companies. Companies will differentiate based on people, for example, GE and their ability to develop leaders. Operational capability, for example, like Walmart and supply chain management, or assets, Apple with intellectual property that they have for the iPhone and the software that we have. Data, obviously, is another asset. And it has a lot of characteristics similar to software that is very attractive. But you don't have to have software developers necessarily to create it. You have to capture it. The marginal cost of sharing an insight is close to nothing versus the marginal cost of making yet another iPhone, where you have to put a couple $100s in manufacturing costs and components in order to create that thing. So now, to look a little bit deeper, the important ingredients to a successful database model required thinking about a few different dimensions. The first is sourcing. Where do you get the data from? Actually, I'll go through all these, and I'll go through some examples in a second. The second is what you can do, your ability to process and manage it. The third is how valuable it is. And the fourth is a tricky one, but scarcity. So let's take sourcing. There's actually an information business that's been around for hundreds of years. It's called the news industry. One of the challenges that the news industry has is sourcing of information. When Hillary Clinton announces her campaign, she brings a bazillion reporters along with her. In fact, I think for some of her events, there were more reporters than there were constituents for her to talk to. So if you're CNN or ABC or whatever, you don't have an exclusive news story. Everybody knows this. You're not saying anything that people can't get from an alternative channel. Now, for those of us who like to watch House of Cards, if you have an intimate relationship with a high-powered member of Congress, you can get some exclusive bits of information that can create some very significant opportunities for a business. So sourcing of data is really important. Processing capability. What can you do with it? Oftentimes, data comes in very raw forms, and it's useless. Your ability to translate that into something actionable is another source of differentiation. You take a company like Palantir, a startup that's valued at over $10 billion. Palantir doesn't own most of the data that they produce, but what they do have is a unique set of processing capabilities. They have algorithms and they have people that they can then sell to you to take your data and turn it into an insight which you would not be able to do on your own. So that creates differentiation for them, and that's why they have the valuation that they do. Utility. Think Nielsen as an example of this. So, what does Nielsen do? They capture data to give you television ratings for content. And they, over time, have been exceptional at embedding that rating to be a core part of the content production process. If you don't know what your Nielsen rating is, you can't, you're not doing your job in that industry. They have made it an indispensable part of the entertainment industry is what your Nielsen ratings are. So they have essentially created a significant utility. Now, scarcity is a tough one because in many cases, making information broadly available reduces its value, reduces its utility. Now, in the Nielsen case, their uniqueness is their brand and their ability to both capture and process this data. But take financial services. If you have a hedge fund that comes up with a way to analyze public information to produce a better prediction of the value of a stock, they have zero incentive to give that to tons and tons of people. So, the last dimension here to manage in terms of business model opportunities is, what is the necessary scarcity of data and managing that. An example I like to talk about that illustrates the power of data is what happened in 2011 when Facebook got a competitive threat from Google. During that year, Google launched Google+, which at the time was a great, by many respects, a more valuable or more technically more advanced, more functionally advanced, certainly a more aesthetically advanced version of a social network. And Google was a formidable competitor for Facebook. They have the scale, they have the technical capability, They have the distribution capability. Google can put Google Plus in front of every search user. So it was a really scary thing for many people to see Google enter the landscape. But Google was missing something pretty significant. And this is one of the reasons why Facebook has survived repeated challenges. They didn't have data. Now, that may sound a little weird because their mission is to go index the world's information. And they do that. They know everything about books and maps, but they don't know that much about people. And this was, in fact, the reason that they created Google+, is that there's a hole in their mission, which is around people. Now, Facebook also has a mission around this. It's more people-centric. Our mission is to make the world more open and connected. And so we have really specialized and optimized in the capture of data around people to facilitate social interaction. So when Google tried to compete with Facebook on it, it didn't have anything to offer. So when you log into Google+, nobody's there. There's nothing to see. It doesn't have your history. Your friends aren't there. As a result, really the most innovative thing to come out of Google+ was stuff like Hangouts and new collaboration technologies, but it's really gone nowhere. Now, there's tons of examples of companies that have created data, have incorporated data into their business models. And in Q&A, I'd love to go into any of these that you guys would like to talk about. I'll talk about my favorite, which is Vail Ski Resort. So I remember in 2009, I was at an IT conference, and I met the CIO of Vail. And the first question that popped into my mind was, why the hell does Vail have a CIO? I couldn't understand what the purpose of having a technology organization for a ski resort was. But then the guy proceeded to tell me about his vision of where he was going. He was building RFID ski passes into their operations, which had an operational efficiency benefit. It was easier, faster for them to process people through lists. They didn't need to have as many people at the bottom of the hill. Great. But this was not what he was interested in. That just made the CEO happy and the CFO happy for him to make the investment. What he was interested in was the data that he was going to be able to capture. Because as you ski in Vail, and they've now extended this to many other ski resorts, they're capturing what lift you're going on, what runs you're on, and they can start building up this data profile of you. Now, Vail is smart. The first thing they did is to give that value right back to you so we don't get freaked out about it. And so they created this mobile app that will keep track of your elevation that you've got, and you can compete with your friends. You can compete with other people on the slopes. They've got badges and other things. So it creates a more engaging consumer experience. But there's a business benefit, too. They're profiling you. They get to understand what kind of person you are, what kind of skier you are. Do you spend your time on the bunny slopes? Do you spend your time on the expert slopes? And they can incorporate that into other business practices, into other marketing practices, like when you walk into the hotel room at the end of the day, what's the ad that you see on the television screen? Maybe you really suck at skiing and they want to sell you ski lessons. Or maybe you're really awesome and you might want to try heli-skiing. And so it's just a small example of what you can do. And all of these companies that are up here have been really innovative in taking data from a traditional business and incorporating it into their business models, and it's adding tremendous value. And it does it across multiple dimensions. There's the obvious of when you incorporate data, you can drive operational efficiency. Great. This is not new. We've been doing it for a while. But the customer experience that you can create, this is new, especially as things get more interconnected. And whether you're an airline or a car company, the user experience that you can create through effective use of data is really transforming industries. And it's also creating revenue opportunities. You can create brand new product lines. I mean, think about the Amazon recommendation engine. One of the big problems with online retail is it's not like walking through a store where a good store manager will be smart enough to put the People magazine thing at the checkout counter so you can see when somebody's sleeping with somebody else. Maybe I want to buy that People magazine and take it home and check out what's going on. That is a serendipitous purchase. What's the equivalent online? When you go online, hey, I'm looking for bicycling gloves. Type it in, find it, buy it, check it out, you're done. The recommendation engine solves this problem by looking at your purchase patterns, looking at your demographics, linking that up with the purchase patterns of others that have the same demographics, ranking that based on some intelligent algorithms, and then coming up with a set of things that you might want to buy. And how many people here have purchased something on Amazon or other similar websites because of the recommendation engine? So it's a great example of how data creates revenue opportunities, and there's tons more. Now, of course, there's lots of issues here as well. First is information security. So as we capture all this data, it becomes a big target. And if you look at the world in terms of what's going on with Target or Sony, you realize that whether or not you want to become a database business, information security is a major risk. And so it's going to require investment to protect information assets. This is really more a reflection of getting into a digital world. The second, which is really complicated, is privacy expectations and regulation. The value exchange on data, we're still figuring it out. And people are comfortable with data sharing and uncomfortable with data sharing for the exact same functionality, just changing the context. In fact, all you have to do is just look at data privacy in, say, Germany versus the United States, and you get to the fact that this really taps into something very complex, which is societal expectations and societal norms around data privacy, or really privacy overall. And regulators are not fast-moving organizations. Technology is, so we have gone way in front of them in terms of our capability, which creates risk, because you can create a business model that can be instantly destroyed by a regulator for reasons that are for societal benefit. So it is an issue when creating a database business model. Leadership, culture, really people overall. And if I start with data scientists, that's a very difficult skill set to hire and develop in today's world. There's just a scarcity of them. But the bigger issue that I see here is that there are a lot of places where leadership and culture are somewhat uncomfortable with data. Take an advertising agency, for example. Which is the more compelling sales pitch for an ad campaign? One where the leader comes in and says, here's the message that we're going to go after. We've done all the focus group analyses. Here's what the data says. Or the one where the presentation is, well, here's our ad, and the ad makes you cry. A lot of organizations are emotionally driven, and it's not necessarily bad. But it is the challenge that data runs into. The anecdote is one of the most powerful ways to diffuse a data-based argument. The data says this, yeah, but so-and-so had this other thing, or emotion. So leadership is a big part of this, and culture is a big part of this. The last thing that's a challenge or an issue is the pace of innovation. And really, this is kind of a warning sign. Basically, the short of it is, if you don't think about this stuff, somebody else will. And just look at the transportation industry and what Uber is doing to these companies. It's not that they have all of the operational infrastructure globally to have taxi cab drivers all over the place. They know how to manage data better than anybody else. And they are disrupting that industry quite quickly. Airbnb and hospitality, another great example on this. And so my point on this is that, yes, there are risks and issues, but in some cases, the bigger risk is to not take advantage of the opportunity. The last question to really just think about is, for your business or your industry, what are the information assets? What are the things that are unique data assets that you have available to you, and what are you doing with them? This is probably the most important question for any business to ask. And with that, I'll thank you for your time, and we'll move into Q&A. We have mics down here and up there. We have mic runners, so you can either come down or just raise your hand, and we'll try to bring a mic to you. And we'll start with you, since you were first to rush the stage.
Excellent. Thank you very
much. And by the way,
much.
I'm happy to answer questions on anything, about myself, about Facebook, about this thesis, about data. So anything is fair game.
Thank you, Tim. So Jason Nadeau, full-time MBA 05, in the marketing team at Pure Storage. My question for you is, I'm really interested about this fail-fast culture. And so when people launched products and they failed miserably, can you tell us a little bit about what actually happened at work? Like, how did you celebrate that? How did you talk about it? What happened to the people? Like, were they, did they get promoted? Like, how did you kind of like, right? How did you actually operationalize that?
They don't get promoted. I mean, they don't get, it's certainly success when you're experimenting is better than failure, but the point on failure is not that you had it, it's what did you learn from it. I'll turn it into more of a Silicon Valley question, just for answer for a second, rather than a Facebook answer. If you think about, if you were walking around the street in, Dayton, Ohio, and you met a gentleman who came up to you and asked you to invest $50,000 in his business, and he told you, I just want you to know that I've had 4 other businesses and they've all gone bankrupt. You would probably say, get the hell out of my face. In the Silicon Valley, however, we take the serial entrepreneur whose 4 previous startups have cratered and say, wow, that guy's an experienced entrepreneur. How can I sign up? And the point is that we have an expectation here of experimentation, innovation, and so with venture capital, we don't expect 100% of the investments to return. We expect maybe 10. And so it really doesn't matter that you failed. It's what did you get out of it, and do you know how to actually run the company and communicate to investors and all that other kind of stuff. And it's the same thing within Facebook. It's really not the failure of the initiative that matters. It's really more how you ran it that matters. And so a lot of people ultimately have gotten promoted, not because of their failures, but because of their resulting successes, which would not have been enabled had they not been successful with any of their products. Maybe raise hands and we'll try to get the mic runners to, over here.
Hi, Tim. Good morning, and thanks for coming here and putting some time aside for Q&A. I have 2 questions. Like yourself, I've been in technology for pretty much my life. My first question is that you've held technology leadership positions at some very traditional companies, KLA obviously being very traditional, compared to the rest of the companies in the Bay Area, and then at Facebook, which is very fast and very forward-thinking. What have you learned in terms of, the CIO responsibilities that are very different in terms of what keeps you up at night? And if you're sleeping well, I guess we could, tailor that down to concerns. At a traditional company, leading technology there versus Facebook. So that's my first question. And my second question is, in terms of leadership and management, I would expect that there are totally different things that you could talk about in terms of how to lead and manage people at a company such as KLA-Tencor versus a company such as Facebook, where you have a lot of the millennials who are super sharp, very, very, very intelligent, very, very fast forward-thinking and capable. So how do you lead and manage in those 2 different environments?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I'm a good leader at Facebook because of KLA-Tencor. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I know really, really well because of how KLA-Tencor ran their business. Just an example, I work for the CFO, which many people think that the IT organization working for the CFO will lead to you being starved of resources, and in my world it's actually quite the opposite because KLA taught me how to make a CFO really, really happy. So I give my CFO everything that he wants and then some, and therefore he trusts my ability to make my own decisions on investments, and it's actually, in many respects, easier for me to get resources than it is for a product organization, because I only have to convince the CFO, the product organization has to convince the CFO and Zuck. There is overlap between these 2 worlds. The Facebook world is more people-centric than KLA-Tencor was. And I think that the reason why traditional industries tend to be less people-centric is that their assets are less embedded in their workforces, and they're more in their factories or their intellectual property or in their brands. But for knowledge organizations where the asset is the thoughts and the ideas of the workforce, you really need to take care of people much more. So if there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it's not technology, it's not politics, it's not whether or not we're going to get resources for something, it's people. It's making my people excited about what they're doing and inspiring them and leading them. And in our world, we don't use the organization chart as a way of getting stuff done. You're a leader if you have followers. It's not because you were anointed a management position. A management position at Facebook is a responsibility. You have work to do as a manager you wouldn't otherwise have to do. But as a leader, anybody can lead. All you have to do is get some people to follow you. And that makes a lot of things really different for us. Yes? Just keep talking, I'll turn it on.
Yeah, no worries. Laurie Rimmer, MBA 2010. Just got a question about data, and it's really about people who say that they use data versus people who actually use data. There was an interview on late night TV from a presidential candidate, for example, who said he didn't believe in climate change using the data, and then other people, of course, from various groups who used data and made conclusions, various different conclusions. How do you differentiate from people who say they use data and actually using it to draw the right conclusions and inferences?
Yeah, there's one of the books that we had in school was How to Lie with Statistics, and it kind of gets to the dangers of data. That a lot of times people will use data to reinforce a bad decision because you can manipulate how you've selected your sample or the data set that you're drawing your conclusion from to make things look the way that you want to. And I see this even within Facebook. There are organizations which are more intuitively driven for which data gets used to reinforce beliefs that they have. But if the data is counter to what they believe, they tend to want to ignore it. I think the best way to see how, the difference between people who are truly data-oriented and people who are, just want to use data to, when it serves them, is the notion of experimentation and how they approach experimentation. If you approach a hypothesis as something where you are going to prove the result and you're just looking for the data to do so, then you're probably in one camp. If the hypothesis is really irrelevant and it's the data analysis of the hypothesis that matters, then you are truly a data-driven organization. So it really gets down to experimentation and how you test with it. We got a few other people up here. Yes.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. You brought up the opposition between data and anecdotes, especially ones that are overlaid with emotion. It seems to me that one of the major challenges with social media is that it can serve as an amplifier not of substance, but of these emotional, ideological, or moralistic narratives. So for example, the public shaming stuff going on, the Justine Sacco incident, for example. So I'm wondering, what role can data play in helping to improve the mapping between the substance of an issue and the exposure it gets on social media?
Yeah, a lot. So you just go into Newsfeed, for example. The general idea with Newsfeed is you have a lot of connections to people and maybe to other things, like to applications or to businesses. And that presents a set of potential information for you to see. Now, Newsfeed is successful if it prioritizes the stuff that's most interesting to you in a way that you keep engaging with it, you keep coming back to it. And we can see that based on your adoption. So that's a data analysis that happens. But one of the elements of data which is more art is, your point is exactly right. You don't want to have self-reinforcing ecosystems where you just sort of divide people up, where Maybe I'll try not to get into provocative examples, but maybe I like cars, and so I only want to, so I tend to engage more with people who have cars conversation, and I don't really like babies as much, and so I don't like to see those things in my newsfeed. And so my behaviors sort of reinforce that. But at the same time, my cousin, who just had a baby, well, I do care about that because she's somebody that I'm really close to. So these are why you can't just have like a straight line regression analysis to predict things. You really have to get into more complex multivariate systems to make more accurate predictions. And so data has there is a huge role to play. It also gets to another point, which is we are never, ever, I believe, going to get to a world where we are entirely beholden to our systems and they are smart enough to make all decisions for us. There is something about the human soul that I don't believe ever could be coded into a piece of silicon or software that gets into some of these emotional aspects of things. And when it doesn't feel right, we make adjustments, whether it's to our software or to our behaviors or to what we're doing. So hopefully I've answered your question. I think I have time for one more question, and then I'm getting roped off the stage.
Steve Terasaki, Evening Weekend, 1989. You mentioned a little bit that you invest in yourself. So can you talk a little bit more about the things that you do to invest in who you become? And can you give us an example of how that's changed or affected some of the things that you're doing professionally at Facebook?
So there's a lot of stuff that I'm exposed to at work where I can learn new things. I'm constantly pushing myself into new aspects of our business that I don't know about. But the best answer I have to your question goes back to this cultural attribute of student always. As an alum of the Berkeley Columbia program, my classmates and I have access to audit classes. And we actually were fortunate we have access to audit classes on both Berkeley and Columbia. Last year, two other classmates and mine and I, we decided to go and take a block week at Columbia on economics and the Fed's role in economic systems with Frederick Mishkin. Amazing, amazing experience. So it was really kind of a macro econ vacation, as demented as that sounds. But it's what we did. And so Matt Cooper, Mike Chapin, and I, we went to New York. We took this week-long class. Every night we would discuss stuff. At the end of the week, we went out to dinner with Glenn Hubbard. We went out to dinner earlier in the week with Frederick Mishkin. We had just an amazing experience. It was one of the best things that we did last year. So we try to do something like that every year. But there's opportunities to invest in yourself every day, whether it's reading a book or it's taking a class. And I think the key point is to carve out time for it, because it gets so easy to get caught into the day-to-day that we discount the long-term value of making this investment. I want to thank everybody for listening to me for the last hour. I really appreciate it.